longing here I find my rest, and without you I fall apart. You're the one that guides my heart. Lord, I need you, oh, I need you. Every hour I need you. My one defense, my righteousness. Oh God, how I need you. Where sin runs deep, your grace is more. Where grace is found is where you are. And where you are, Lord, I am free. Holiness is Christ in me. Where you are, Lord, I am free. Holiness is Christ in me. Lord, I need you, oh, I need you. Every hour I need you. My one defense, my righteousness. Oh God, how I need you. So teach my song to rise to you. When temptation comes my way, and when I cannot stand, I'll fall on you. Jesus, you're my hope and stay. And when I cannot stand, I'll fall on you. Jesus, you're my hope and stay. Lord, I need you, oh, I need you. Every hour I need you. My one defense, my righteousness. Oh God, how I need you. My one defense, my righteousness. Oh God, how I need you. Long before all of creation, all that I see, you stood alone in your glory eternally. Then with a word you created galaxies formed at your feet. You're the highest of all, you're as high as can be. Glorified on the throne, give praise to the King. All of heaven bows down in worship to thee. Lord, you are, oh Lord, by far highest of all. Who, Lord, can fathom your power, mercy, and grace? Raining your blessings upon us mercy reigns and never dies. There's a place where streams of grace flow deep and wide, where all the love I've ever found comes like a flood, comes flowing down. At the cross, I surrender my life. I'm in all of you, in all of you, where your love ran red and my sin washed white. I owe all to you, I owe all to you, Jesus. There's a place where sin and shame are powerless, where my heart has peace with God and forgiveness, where all the love I've ever found comes like a flood, comes flowing down. At the cross, I surrender my life. I'm in all of you, in all of you, where your love ran red and my sin washed white. I owe all to you, I owe all to you. Here my hope is found, here on holy ground. Here I bow down, here I bow down. Here arms open wide, here you saved my life. Here I bow down, here I bow. At the cross, I surrender my life. I'm in all of you, in all of you, where your love ran red and my sin washed white. I owe all to you, 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 Jesus. Oh, how good it is when the family of God dwells together in spirit, in faith and unity, where the bonds of peace, of acceptance and love are the fruit of His presence here among us. So with one voice we'll sing to the Lord, and with one voice we'll lift out His word till the whole earth sees the Redeemer has come, for He dwells in the presence of His people. Oh, how good it is on this journey we share, to rejoice with the happy and weep with those who mourn. For the weak find strength, the afflicted find grace, when we offer the blessing of belonging. So with one voice we'll sing to the Lord, and with one voice we'll lift out His word till the whole earth sees the Redeemer has come, for He dwells in the presence of His people. Oh, how good it is to embrace His command, to prefer one another, forgive as He forgives. When we live as one, we all share in the love of the Son with the Father and the Spirit. So with one voice we'll sing to the Lord, people. So with one voice we'll sing to the Lord, and with one voice we'll lift out his word, till the whole earth sees the Redeemer has come, for he dwells in the presence of his people. For he dwells in the presence of his people. The law of the Lord is perfect, converting the soul. The testimony of the Lord is sure, making wise the simple. More to be desired are they than gold, yea, than much fine gold. Sweeter also than honey, and the honeycomb. The statutes of the Lord are right, rejoicing the heart. The commandment of the Lord is pure, enlightening the eyes. More to be desired are they than gold, yea, than much fine gold. Sweeter also than honey, and the honeycomb. The fear of the Lord is clean, enduring forever. The judgments of the Lord are true and righteous altogether. More to be desired are they than gold, yea, than much fine gold. Sweeter also than honey, and the honeycomb. Let the words of my mouth and the meditation of my heart be accepted in thy sight, O Lord, my strength and my Redeemer. More to be desired are they than gold, yea, than much fine gold. Sweeter also than honey, and the honeycomb. And in keeping of them there is great reward, there is great reward. And in keeping of them there is great reward.
Good evening. I'm not Barry, I'm not Bink, I'm not Dave Golden, but I'm the guy that is going to give you your announcements today. Glad you're all here. I know it's a Wednesday night. Work is challenging, but the Lord makes a way, doesn't he? Tonight, we need to keep some people in prayer. Rena Howard is going to have spinal surgery on the 2nd of November, and that's going to require quite a long recovery. And the Websters, Rita and Jim Webster, have various medical issues. We need to keep them in prayer. And also their daughter, Becky, who is having tests run on Thursday. We need to keep her in prayer. There are many who are sick and hospitalized, and we need to keep all those folks in prayer, especially some of the ones that have come down with COVID recently. We have some people recovering from that, so keep those folks in prayer. We'd like to express sympathy to the second grade son of Joshua and April Allen. They're dear friends of the Hurleys. That young man died on Saturday after a sudden illness. And Josh is a minister at the Main Street Church of Christ in Pikeville, Kentucky. So we need to keep Josh and April Allen in prayers. These are in your announcements, but I just want to remind you of some upcoming events. On the 29th of October, Trunk or Treat is going to be here from 5:30 to 7:30. It says that a dinner will be provided, and that's good. That's kind of new for Trunk or Treat. So usually we just eat candy, but they're going to have a dinner. That's great. There's a sign-up sheet on the Manassas Kids Bulletin Board. So if you're coming or going to be part of that, you need to make sure you've signed up. And we're now also collecting individually wrapped candy. There's a collection bin for that candy on the table in the foyer. So if you're bringing in candy for trunk or treats, please bring it there. On the 30th, now that's the Saturday, the next day on the 30th of October, there's going to be a Fifth Sunday Congregational Fellowship. And that fellowship is going to be after AM services. You're all welcome to come. Obviously, it's for everyone. Everybody needs to bring a main dish and either a side dish or a dessert for that. Also, between services on the 30th, there's going to be a craft day where Karen and I and others are going to be here making crafts to go into the Magi boxes. So we need folks that would like to stay after and work on crafts to stay after and to work on crafts that afternoon. And then the next thing that's coming up is the 4th of November is going to be a prep day for Magi. That's a Friday. We're going to be getting all the stuff out. We got all the stuff in the shed back here. We have like 35 crates of stuff. About $5,000 to $10,000 worth of stuff is in that little shed back there. We're going to get all that out here and into the fellowship hall, where the next day, on Saturday the 5th of November, we're going to have a packing party, and we'll start at 2:30 on Saturday. And the kids, Manassas kids and the youth are going to be here to help pack boxes for Magi. We're going to do about 160 of those boxes. We still need to bring in a few items. As I was looking through the things, and Karen, are you in the room? She is not. I'm trying to remember this from memory, but we still need school supplies, and we need girls' clothes. I think 5 to 7 years of age, girls' clothes. So, and everybody needs underwear. For some reason, we're down on underwear. We hate to send all these outfits out without underwear to go with them. So that's useful to know. If you bring in anything to donate, there are bins in the back here labeled Magi. That's where you can put the stuff. All right, on the 12th of November, there's a Senior Explorers Club hike at Sky Meadows State Park. I guess that's for the old people like us, right? We're going to get out there and hike. Hopefully not too far. We extend a special invitation to the Owls. We're planning a short hike, and you're invited to come, enjoy the views. And they're talking about a church van that's going to leave the building on November the 12th at 9 a.m., and there will be lunch at Cracker Barrel afterwards. That's worth going for. There's a lunch at Cracker Barrel. Oh, the 14th of November is a Monday night for the Master, and there's a bunch of things that we need to do. So I don't know what those are, but they always have a lot of things that need to be done. All right. And now, last but not least is, of course, Lads to Leaders. And that is going to be happening the 6th through the 9th of April at the Gaylord Opryland Resort there in Nashville, Tennessee. But if you're going, John Sullivan and Amber Sullivan need your a down payment, if you will, of like $45 for each adult and each youth who plans on attending. And they need that not later than the 6th of November. So see John and Amber Sullivan to make that $45 payment for every family member that's going to be going. All right, that's all the announcements I have. Is there anything that I missed? All right. Well, let's go ahead and start out tonight with a song, "A Beautiful Life." This is the first song that I ever led as a young man. Each day I'll do a golden deed by helping those who are in need. My life on earth is but a span, and so I'll do the best I can. Life's evening sun is sinking low. A few more days, and I must go to meet the deeds that I have done, where there will be no setting sun. Does that seem high? It seems high to me. The only life that will endure is one that's kind and good and pure. And so for God I'll take my stand. Each day I'll lend a helping hand. Life's evening sun is sinking low. A few more days, and I must go to meet the deeds that I have done, where there will be no setting sun, while going down life's weary road. I'll try to lift some traveler's load. I'll try to turn the night to day, make flowers bloom along the way. Life's evening sun is sinking low. A few more days, and I must go to meet the deeds that I have done, where there will be no setting sun. Our next song before our prayer and class will be 843. Those that are using the book, 843, "As a Deer Panteth for the Water." As the deer panteth for the water, so my soul longs after thee. You alone are my heart's desire, and I long to worship thee. You alone are my strength, my shield. To you alone may my spirit yield. You alone are my heart's desire, and I long to worship thee. You're my friend, and you are my brother, even though you are a king. I love you more than any other, so much more than anything. You alone are my strength, my shield. To you alone may my spirit yield. You alone are to worship thee. I want you more than gold or silver, only you can satisfy. You alone are the real joy giver and the apple of my eye. You alone are my strength, my shield. To you alone may my spirit yield. You alone are my heart's desire, and I long to worship thee.
Let's pray together. Our Father in heaven, we're thankful for this evening that we can come together and spend time studying your word and growing closer as a family. We're mindful tonight, especially, Father, of the physical things that come as a result of sin and separation from you in this world. We're mindful of those that are sick, the flu and RSV and COVID, so many things that afflict us. We pray, Father, that you bring healing to everybody who can't be with us tonight. We're mindful especially, Father, of the Allen family and the loss of their son recently. Please bring them comfort that only you can. Please help their surrounding church family to be a love and support to them in this time of loss. We're also mindful, Father, of Rena and her upcoming surgery. We pray that you're with her doctors and the nurses that will be providing care, that the surgery will go smoothly and that she will have a quick and uneventful recovery. We're thankful, Father, for the teachers that you've given us in this congregation, those that so carefully prepare lessons to bring us closer to you through the study of your word. Please be with them tonight. Help them to deliver messages that are from you and full of joy and full of love and humility. Please help us as students to take these lessons and change our lives to be more like you. We're thankful for your Son, and it's in his name we pray. Amen.
I was going to say, you're close. 4:15. Hey guys. How's your eyes? Seem good out of both of them? Yeah? We just took Jairus up for his second cataract surgery, and those are always, to me, they make me edgy, yet everybody seems to, in this congregation, have very successful results from the surgery. The day before, the first time we went up, that we had his other first eye done, there was a lady sitting there, and I was just saying, are you here for your husband to get his cataract surgery? And she said, yes. And I said, is he getting the left one or the right one? She said, both at the same time. So he's basically walking out of there blind for at least a day, but anyway, I'm glad you're feeling better. Good evening, and welcome to Wednesday night Bible study, and welcome to those who are watching online. And I know James is home with Vera, because James got himself some COVID somehow. And I said, if you quit testing yourself, you'd never get it. He's not listening to me. James. So anyway, I know he's home taking it easy, and that's good. We need to finish up. We were in chapter 4 last week and almost got done, and we need to finish that. And by now it should be obvious to the most casual observer that 2 months into a 3-month study, we're only 4 chapters into Daniel. We're not going to make it to the end, at least not studying the way we're doing. But I do have a plan and I do have a strategy of how we're going to finish this, because the topics are so important. So this may kind of turn into a topical study for the last 5 classes that we have next month. We do have 5 Wednesdays next month, so that's good. But we'll talk about that. And so much so that strategy will start tonight, because after chapter 4 comes chapter 5, but that's not where we're going next. And I'm going to ask you if you know why when we get there, but we'll in due time. Chapter 4, we remember, is that story about the bungle in the jungle. This is the last episode and chapter of King Nebuchadnezzar. He has been told in another one of his disturbing dreams, they paint this image of him being this great tree, this provider, this dominion, the whole earth sees him, and then as fast as they're done with that pat on the back, the angel or the heavenly being tells him how that tree is going to be chopped down. All the birds will go away, all the animals will go away. There will be a stump left that's protected for the roots, but he's going to have to spend, as the interpretation would come out, probably most agree, this 7-year period where he's going to be driven away from the kingdom, and he's going to live out in the woods, and he's going to grow long hair and long fingernails. He's going to eat grass and eat dew off the trees, and just kind of something that you and I have trouble imagining, and a story that, quite frankly, those who try to discredit Daniel or try to discredit the Bible will use as, you can't believe this. They do that. And yet we're here to say, no, we believe every word of it because of the meaning and the message that we get, most importantly, at the end. So he's told this is going to happen. He gets the interpretation of what's going to happen to him. And if you remember, when the interpretation comes, the angelic being quickly, the dream and the interpretation are very similar. The only difference is the angelic being starts telling him halfway through that instead of it being a tree or this, it's him and him and him, and he's basically telling him this is what's coming. That's got to leave a mark on your brain, at least about what's going to happen and or when it's going to happen. The transition point for this, of being warned and him being sent, comes in verse 29. What's interesting is, though, after that interpretation, if you look 2 verses back in verse 27, he's told, "Therefore, O king, may my advice be pleasing to you. Break away from your sins by doing righteousness, and from your iniquities by showing mercy to the poor, and in case there may be a prolonging of your prosperity." He's kind of getting a second chance here. He's not going to be the only kingdom until Christ comes, because we already know that that's not going to happen. But he's almost given stay of execution. And you get some hint and some insight about what he's doing wrong. He's letting the poor people stay poor. He's not using the wealth to help the kingdom that he's serving. And he's not acting very righteously. And Daniel's just telling him, if you just do this, things are going to work out better for you. Verse 29, here's the transition point. Here's the how quickly they forget scenario. 12 months later, he was walking on the roof of the royal palace of Babylon. The king reflected and said, "Is this not Babylon the Great, which I myself have built as a royal residence, by the might of my power and for the glory of my majesty?" See, it's all me, and after a dream like that, I don't know how much we might forget in a year's time. Nebuchadnezzar, over the last couple of chapters, has proven himself somewhat negligent in the memory department. And he always seems like he has to keep being taught a lesson. Well, here this is happening, and he's saying this either to himself or out loud. And to be fair, Babylon was a great city. It was a beautiful city. It had architectural nuances. He just did everything he could with the money and the power that he had. So I guess from a human perspective, we can understand somebody standing up on a rooftop overlooking this glorious kingdom and say, "Look at me." And I think, and the only thing I can do to try to bring that to us is, have you ever done something in your life that was either good or you did well or had great outcomes, Did you even for a moment, and maybe I'm only thinking of myself here, did you even for a moment stop and say, look at that, yay me, look what I did, before you stopped long enough in the day to say that wasn't me at all. Anything good comes from my life, you give credit to God. He takes it all for himself after repeatedly being told over and over and over again, it ain't about you. It's about God and what he does. As soon as he's uttering these words, that voice comes from heaven, and had to be stinging, and had to be one of those, almost I forgot all about that kind of scenarios, because by the time he's done bragging about what he sees, voice from heaven comes down and says, remember that dream we had about a year ago? Well, it starts today. Just 12 months later, and off he goes into the woods and does his thing for 7 years. Now, and again, 7 years is just the allotted time God gave him. There was no, we'll see how you're doing after 3. We'll do an attitude check after 4. There was none of that. You'll be out there for 7 years, and whether you figure it out early or at the time, you're going to figure it out, and that's how long you're going to be gone. We have reasonable confidence that 7 years is the time frame that we're talking about, and it makes sense. Don't know what drove him away. Don't know if he just wandered off, chased out. Who knows? We're not told. We're just told that prophecy was fulfilled, and he's out there for 7 years. When he comes back, he says, basically he says, after I figured out what it was I was out here for, he gets it. Verse 34. Now, last week, remember, we talked about how this chapter started with this praise that Nebuchadnezzar gives in this narrative that's at least initially designed by him, but God has put this in here for us to read. He makes this pitch about how great God is and his majesty and all those things, but we were convinced, at least I was, and we talked about it, he falls short of that praise being for God being the one and only God, not just one among many members. And just to prove that it probably wasn't him accepting God as the only God was verse 29. When not 12 months later, it's all about him again. And maybe the gods he thinks helped him get there. Not sure. But that's where he is. Now, when he comes out of this, he says this other prayer. He says this other praise. I'm going to read this, and I'm going to ask you what's different about this praise, because there's a lot of similar words. But we want to at least analyze, since both of these praise sections are in the same chapter, same time frame, same topic, before he goes out and after he comes back, what's different, and what conclusion do we make? Verse 34 starts by, but at the end of that period, I, Nebuchadnezzar, raised my eyes toward heaven, and my reason returned to me, and I blessed the Most High, and praised and honored him who lives forever. For his dominion is everlasting dominion. His kingdom endures from generation to generation. All the inhabitants of the earth are accounted as nothing. But he does according to his will, and in the host of heaven, and among the inhabitants of earth. And no one can ward off his hand, or say to him, what hast thou done? At that time my reason returned to me. My majesty and splendor were restored to me for the glory of my kingdom. And my counselors and my nobles began seeking me again. And so I reestablished my sovereignty, surpassing greatness that was added to me. Now I, Nebuchadnezzar, praise, exalt, and honor the King of heaven, for all his works are true, his ways are just, and he is able to humble those who walk in pride. Quite a finish of what he thinks based on where he's been. What do you think about that praise as opposed to the first, what we get at the beginning of the chapter? Any thoughts, any ideas? What's different? Yes, ma'am. Hold on, microphone's coming. Hold on.
He humbled himself.
Say it again.
He humbled himself.
That's one. He speaks specifically to his own humility. And when he says, humble the one who walks in pride, who's he talking about? Himself. Himself. Anybody else? Anybody see anything else in there that stands out that might make you a believer? Yes, ma'am. Or make you believe that he's a believer.
He gave supremacy to God.
He gave supremacy.
Before, he was just one among many.
Mm-hmm.
Now he's saying, King of heaven, you have greater authority than any of the rest. Not necessarily saying he's stopped believing in the other gods,
Mm-hmm.
but he's certainly giving this God higher status
Yeah.
and authority and power.
Yeah, I agree. I agree. Anybody else? Anything in the back?
I would say he understands why he was punished.
Yeah. He forgot a lot in just 12 months, right? Before he starts bragging about his kingdom. But he remembered that start date 7 years later. He didn't forget that. And the first thing he says is he gets his reason back, which must have just, again, I'm not sure what that, if you can express a feeling for that, but, you know, we've all been sick, and then one day we wake up, we feel better, our appetite's better, and there's just this, wow, you know, I'm better. And he seems to figure that out. And the first thing he says is, I blessed the Most High and praised and honored him who lives forever and ever. He didn't say that in the first one. Who else? Yes? You?
Yeah, he uses similar language to the language Daniel uses in the 7th chapter when he sees the vision of the Son of Man.
Mm-hmm.
He uses the same language as his dominion is an everlasting dominion,
Yeah.
and his kingdom lasts forever.
Yep.
I was going to say that he finally realizes and did what he should have done in the beginning. He praised and exalted God.
Yes.
That's what he should have done in the
Yes.
beginning. That's how he got into trouble, is
Yep.
honoring and exalting himself.
He praised and he exalted him. He says he does according to his will. Basically, he makes the confession that this God does whatever he wants to do when he wants to do it. Go ahead. You go ahead. He's all right. Right.
God was the one who gave him all that power and everything. You didn't get here quick enough.
There's no health insurance that covers that sort of thing.
God was the one who put him, and as Daniel said in the beginning, he sets up kings and he deposes them.
Yeah.
And Nebuchadnezzar forgot that God had put him in charge to punish Israel. He forgot that everything he had came from God
Yeah.
and not himself. And we do that. We forget that the blessings that flow into our lives, a lot of times, like you said, come from God. And he is the one who should be exalted and praised and thanked for everything.
All the things that he gave himself credit for in verse 29, he says the same things are being restored to him, although he's not taking credit for it. He now realizes, God gave me these things. God can take those things away whenever he wants because he does according to his will. Yes, ma'am.
He said, man is nothing.
That's what exactly. He says the earth and its inhabitants are nothing, neither is the host
Yeah, that's it.
that's with him. So he's put a priority now on God that makes me think that he gets it. Yeah. I mean, I think he gets it. And if that's true, if that's over here, Mike. If that's true, it almost makes you wonder, is this a person or a soul that we're going to see again one day? Almost makes you wonder that. Now, history in the first 4 chapters tells us he's pretty forgetful, and I'm not sure how long he would have carried that on because he doesn't stay as a king longer. But it just really seems like he has come to the point where he understands who God is and how he's supposed to be respected and treated. Whether that converted him or not, we don't know. But at the end of all those trials, all these 4 chapters, it finally seems that Nebuchadnezzar's got enough lessons from God where he's figured out, like, enough, I get it. Yes, ma'am.
He also, at the end, he indicated that we have no right to ask, to question God, to ask him, what have he done?
Mm-hmm. Yep. Yeah, he was just, he got everything back. What's the joke? You know what happens when you play a country western song backwards? You get your wife back, you get the dog back, you get the truck back, you get, everything back. He got everything back that he started with here. But I wax country there a little bit. Anyway, so that's my thought in closing this chapter. I think it's one of the I think it's the craziest story in the Bible, unless I'm missing something. But when you look at the values of this king prior to that incident and what he ended up confessing after, you understand why it had to be that way, which we have to look at things when we think we're in a turmoil and God's not in control, short of doing it to ourselves, this is the mindset I think we have to have. But anyway, any other comments before we leave Nebuchadnezzar to the ages? Yes, sir.
One thing I thought was interesting was Nebuchadnezzar mentions that surpassing greatness was added to him. It reminded me of Job after Job went through all his trials, and then he mentions that the Lord blessed him with double of what he had before. So you get almost the same idea from Nebuchadnezzar that he was even his greatness was even much better than it was prior to this.
Yep, absolutely. You can't praise God enough. He's not going to say too much or slow down or anything like that. Keeps our priorities straight. Okay, the next king that's talked about in the book of Daniel for the Babylonian Empire is a king named Belshazzar. Not to be confused with Belteshazzar, which is Daniel, but Belshazzar. Belshazzar is not the next king, though. There's 4 kings that occur in front of him. 2 are the sons in generation to Nebuchadnezzar, and 2 belong to a father and son pair who killed one of the sons and then just gave the reign to his son. So it was kind of one of those, second king scenarios. There's heirs, and then the commander comes in and kills one of the heirs, and then his son reigns, and then finally somebody from the family comes back, and that's Belshazzar. So he's not the next king. He's later on in the scenario. And chapter 5 starts with Belshazzar, but we're not going to study chapter 5 tonight. Now, somebody tell me why. No, because there are. Go ahead.
Chronologically, it's out of chronological order.
There's 3 chapters in Daniel that talk about Belshazzar, and they're not in order. Now, there are several sections in the Old Testament, especially in Kings, that aren't necessarily in chronological order because you basically have somebody telling a story that happened prior to, so it doesn't fit. These are just out of whack, and I don't know why. And it's the same thing with the 2 chapters on Darius. So Belshazzar has chapter 5, which that's the last day. Chapter 5 is the last day of the Babylonian kingdom. And as it works out, the last day of Belshazzar. And we get that. Well, I'm going to ask you, you know what chapter 5 is. Tell me what the title of that chapter is. Yeah, there's a good chapter name, The Writings on the Wall, which, as a fun fact, is where we get that phrase from, because it's something that talks about impending doom. So not only was it a prophecy for Belshazzar, but the saying stuck as well, because he wouldn't live to see the end of the day. So anyway, Writings on the Wall. That's his last year. In chapter 7 is his first year, and chapter 8 is his third year. So we're going to chapter 7. We're going to handle Belshazzar in a chronological way, and I don't think we'll really have to do line by line, but we'll see how that goes, because I don't want to finish this study without getting to chapter 10 and talking about some amazing things, heavenly perspectives that give that Ephesians phrase, our battle is not against flesh and blood, but against the powers of darkness and principalities. That's chapter 10. Chapter 10 is Goosebumps chapter, when you realize who we actually see Satan employs in cities and regions that belong to him in this earth. So I don't want to leave without that. I don't want to leave without talking about the prophecy of the 70 weeks, which takes us from Babylon to Christ. These are all important, and I want to talk a little bit about them, but we're going to stick to this at least chronologically in order. Nebuchadnezzar, just for a history note here, Nebuchadnezzar's son was a man named Amel Marduk. Remember, Marduk was one of those gods. Amel actually is translated evil. I'm not sure it is in the sense that we think it is, but that was his name. Evil Marduk was his son's name, and he was assassinated. And then after that, there was a general that Nebuchadnezzar had named Neriglissar, and he had the reign for about 4 years, and he died a natural death. And his son, Labashi Marduk, I think he was in charge for about a month. And Belshazzar had him killed because Belshazzar's dad, Nabonidus, was ruling. Nebuchadnezzar knocked him off so that his dad could be king. And he became king, and after, of course, him, then his son Belshazzar came on the scene much later, about 539 BC, and towards the end. When they lose their first battle, called the Battle of Opus against the Persians. Persians now, chapter 5, you may know, got Babylon surrounded. And I guess Belshazzar didn't know what else to do except have a party and use God's vessels and all that sort of thing, which doesn't work out well for him. But anyway, so that's the scenario. But if you go to chapter 7, that's the way it starts. In the first year of Belshazzar, king of Babylon, Daniel saw a dream and visions in his mind as he lay in his bed, and then he wrote down the dream and related the following summary of it. So here comes the dream again, but what's the first difference we notice? It's not the kings that are having the dream. This is Daniel that's having the dream. And like the kings that get these visions that he's getting, that he says is in the night, visions and dreams in the night, a little scarier, and he goes on to talk about similar words used, being frightened, being pale, being weak, just because of what he sees. And when he wakes up, and this made me smile because we talked about this early in the study, he wakes up from the dream, and what's the first thing he does? He writes it down. Remember, we talked about that. We have these crazy dreams, and if we don't write them down, sometimes we just forget them by the time we get to the refrigerator. So it's just, he gets up, and he's so moved by this that he decides to write these things down. Chapter 7, you like what? My refrigerator? All right, yeah. Before we get to the coffee pot, we have forgotten the dream because we didn't write it down. Chapter 7 is a mirror of chapter 2. This is what's important about this chapter. With what difference? For you that know this chapter well. What's that? Well, Daniel's having the dream, yes. Both of these chapters, chapter 2 and chapter 7, are talking about the 4 kingdoms that are coming. We get into much more detail as we get closer to chapter 9 and 10, specifically on Greece. And when we get to there, we'll ask why Greece gets all the ink from the last 4 chapters, different topic. But here, we have the same thing. We're going to review these same 4 kingdoms together. The difference is, in chapter 7, it's apocalyptic language. Just like you read in Revelation, just like you read in Ezekiel. And I'll tell you what's interesting, just because I've had to do this, or not had to do this, but have done this. If you read and study the book of the Revelation, and you read and study Ezekiel, and you read and study Daniel, this apocalyptic language, all of a sudden it starts becoming very familiar. You start seeing numbers and symbols and things, and you know exactly what they are. It's almost like learning a language, learning a new language, so that you're not puzzled by it. And that's what these people knew at this time. So when we read something like Revelation, and we're all sitting there scratching our heads thinking this is so bizarre, we have to make stuff up just to make it make sense. It's all language they understood. It was all language that was familiar to them, and it should be no less to us when we really get a handle on what we're talking about. Some things that are even impossible. Ezekiel talks about a wheel that spins and moves in all different directions, and unless you're an engineer, it's tough to get that in your head. I didn't mean to point at you, but you probably make more sense out of it, Matt, than we do. Most of us do. But we understand the meanings of it. And so here he goes describing this again. Daniel said, I was looking in my night vision by night, and behold, the 4 winds of the heaven were stirring up the great sea, and 4 great beasts coming from the sea, different from one another. And the first was like a lion, the wings of an eagle, and with the wings of an eagle. And I kept looking until its wings were plucked and lifted up from the ground and made to stand on 2 feet like a man, and a human mind was also given to it. Behold, another beast, a second one, resembled a bear, and it was raised up high on one side higher than the other, and 3 ribs were in its mouth between its teeth. And thus they said to it, Arise, devour, and eat much meat. After this I kept looking, and behold, another one, like a leopard, which had on its back 4 wings of a bird, and the beast also had 4 heads, and dominion was given to it. And after this I kept looking at the night visions, and behold, a 4th beast, dreaded and terrifying and extremely strong, and it had large iron teeth, and it devoured and crushed and trampled down the remainder of its feet, with its feet. And it was different from the beasts that were before it, and it had 10 horns. And while I was contemplating the horns, behold, another horn, a little one, came up among them. 3 of the first horns were pulled out by the roots before it, and behold, this horn possessed eyes like the eyes of a man, and a mouth uttering great boasts. So but by the time we get to this, we want to really try to identify, historically and otherwise, who this horn is and where he fits in the chain of the numbers that we're talking about, rather than trying to overgeneralize it. So, 4 winds here is like in Revelation talking about the 4 corners of the earth, right? There aren't any. What is he talking about when he represents the 4 winds? If anybody's familiar with any of that kind of language. 4 is a number that's commonly used here in the book of Revelation that's identifying all of God's power. 4 winds. God's in control. These winds are coming, and they're going to affect a sea, just like we would think of winds affecting a sea when we watch on TV, or whether we've been in an ocean. We see what winds do to the ocean. But who's the sea here? What represents the sea? People. Close enough. God has control of history, and he's about to do things that are going to control history, and he's doing this through the affecting the people that are there. And this makes sense because the next thing he's going to talk about is the people of these nations. Only they're going to be described as creatures as opposed to a metal statue or head. Yes, sir?
So yeah, as you mentioned, it's the sea, and what's interesting about that is the sea represents the world, right? Like I said, people, the turmoil that the world always provides. The sea is a dangerous place, and we're reminded of that when we see Jesus walking on the water. And how the sea's scary. It's about to capsize the boat, but Jesus is walking across the water. Then there's the time when he calms the storm. He's woken up and he calms the storm. So the sea always represents that turmoil of the world. And what's interesting about the beasts, and I know you're going to get to the beasts and what their meaning is, they're the same kingdoms that Nebuchadnezzar already saw in his dream. But what's different is that whereas Nebuchadnezzar saw these kingdoms as a beautiful statue, we see how God portrays these kingdoms, and they're these terrifying, horrible beasts that kill and destroy.
Right.
So there's a difference between those two things.
Yeah, absolutely. The stirring up of the ocean waters, I think of what that must have looked like for Peter, and closest I come to it is watching Deadliest Catch. These people that fish off into the North Pacific, what's that sea? The Bering Sea. I get nervous. My stomach turns sitting in my chair watching it on TV. But these waves are big, and you get that idea that this is how God is moving nations and controlling nations for what he has to do, for what he will later tell us is a specific length of time, which we talked about earlier. There's a reason the Babylonians exist. There's a reason the Persians exist. Same thing with the Greeks, and the same thing with the Romans, and each one points to something that brought Christ to us. So they had to be there for a period of time, and we'll revisit that discussion. First one, he says, 4 great beasts come out of the sea of the people. This is similar to Revelation when the dragon is sitting on the shore, and he too is looking at a sea, which represents people, and both the land beast and the sea beast come out of that sea, that sea of people, and that's what it was. Roman ruler, Roman worship, that sort of thing. Similar scenario here. 4 come out of this sea of people, and the first one was like a lion with wings of an eagle, which was historically the symbol of what Babylon used on a lot of their pillars. A lot of their ceremonial things was a lion and or an eagle, but most of the time that lion with the wings of an eagle. The 2 creatures that dominated their species, the lion and the eagle, they were known for that symbol. So it's not, we already kind of know historically that we're talking about Babylon here, but this kind of helps make that a little more understandable. He's talking about them. And then the wings were plucked, which gives us an idea that over time they would not maintain that dynasty. And when it says something about they were plucked and became like a man with a brain, it makes you think of chapter 4, doesn't it? You know, all of a sudden it's not this great nation. It's just this guy that lost his mind and he's out in the woods trying to learn who God is for a period of 7 years. So they were great. They didn't stay that way. Prophecy of chapter 4 told us that's the way it would end. Yes? He's coming.
There's definitely a symbolism in there with Babylon and the wings being plucked and him becoming like a man, because the Babylonians, their whole motif was when they took over a city, when they took over a capital, when they took over anywhere, they would take the gods, they would take the statues, they would take anything identifying that place as its own separate place and bring it back to Babylon. So they have the Jewish treasures, they had the Samaritan treasures, they had treasures from all four corners of everywhere they conquered. And so this dream saying that when the wings are plucked, when the power of Babylon is destroyed, it's just a man. It's just someone, it's just a person behind that facade of this great and powerful beast.
Yep, I agree. Good point. And again, you have that vision of Nebuchadnezzar standing on that rooftop saying, this nation is me. And he learns quickly, not so much. And he becomes just a man, just with a brain. The second beast that comes out of there, and keep in mind that he doesn't say that lions, oh, by the way, you got a name for this chapter yet? Okay, I'm going to tell you. It's lions and tigers and bears, oh my. I know there's no tiger in there, but I took a liberty to map it to the leopard because it just seems to fit, and again, it helps me remember the chapter. Second one is a leopard. Oh, my point is, he doesn't say that a bear or a lion with wings is coming out. Like the book of Revelation, what you keep reading is there's a similarity, there's a semblance. It looks like, it has the appearance of. And it's not until he gets to Rome where he just doesn't have a name for the thing. It seems to be his most serious inquiry when he's talking to this angel about, he gets to that point, he says, now this fourth one we got to talk about a little bit when he's trying to get the interpretation. But so far he sees something that was like a lion with wings come out of the water. Second one, he sees something that resembles a bear with its ferocity and all this kind of stuff. It says it has two sides, one side higher than the other, and that certainly is an image of the Medo-Persian Empire. It was really kind of two kingdoms. At one time the Medes controlled the Persians historically, and then later on when Cyrus the Great came along, that switched, and it was Cyrus and Persia that was in control and not the Medes. And we have to talk a little bit when the time's right about who this Darius was in that part of the world. But anyway, he's talking about those two sides. And it symbolizes the Medo-Persian Empire. It makes sense because they come after Babylon. And the three ribs can be something that are just general meaning, like he's chewing on the ribs of others. But historically what we know is that Persia conquered 3 countries before they made their rule. And it was Babylon, it was Egypt, and a country at that time called Lydia. That's something you look up in the history books or read in the commentary. So it could have been those very 3 countries that they conquered to become the ruling empire. And so that seems to make sense. The third that came out was like a leopard. And again, this one almost, when you're looking back, is almost too obvious. But he's talking about something like a leopard, 4 wings, 4 heads, and leopard is fast, one of the fastest animals out there. And the Greeks, their empire, the history that they have is they conquered their empire and their country faster than any other country did in the shortest amount of time. And the 4 heads and the 4 wings, who knows their Greek history here, pre-biblical? Go ahead.
I don't remember that. I remember it was the Seleucids and the Ptolemies, and I forget the other 2, but they were Alexander's generals, and after Alexander dies, his kingdom was split between these 4 generals.
Right. Splits into 4 generals, and that history gets a lot of press and a lot of ink as time goes on because this is what brought kind of the horror and the terror to right before the Roman Empire came, what they did to the temple, get a lot of detail about what they did to the temple in the time of the Maccabees and what they had done. And yes, Cassander, Lysimachus, Thrace, and Iona, I think was the fourth one, but basically represent Egypt. There was a north and a south Syria, there was Babylon, and there was Persia. And they basically split into four and controlled all these. So again, it makes sense when it's talking about the fast leopard, 4 heads, 4 wings. This is Greece that they're talking about. But when they get to this fourth one, it's interesting because here he doesn't really come up with the name of an animal, which I think is unique because it's so maybe, I don't know what your thoughts are, so bad and so awful that he just doesn't have a description of what it looks like. He simply says, yes, ma'am. Go ahead.
I think it sounds like something mechanized almost.
Uh-huh.
Like if I were to try to describe tanks or machinery to somebody who had never seen such a thing, that's what I think it might sound like.
That's a good point. Because when after you read the first 3, you're trying to come up with an animal, right? And I can't come up with one that lives today that I would say that's it. If dragons flew around, maybe we talk something about that. But he says this beast has no name. He identifies it as dreadful, as terrifying and strong, with iron teeth. Remember in the statue, what metal was the fourth beast? It was iron. Iron, and of course clay when it crumbled. Iron teeth, it devoured, it crushed, and it trampled all others. This was the follow-on to Greece. This was Rome. So what you have here in this chapter, in the first section of this, is, again, a mirror of chapter 2, told in a different way, maybe told generically with a little more detail, but gives you enough evidence here, gives you more evidence in the apocalyptic language of who these countries are easily identified when you roll forward and are looking back to the past. Because there's a lot of things, obviously, Daniel's saying here, especially when you get to chapters 10, 11, and 12. These people reading it have no idea who they're talking about. Very general king of the north and king of the south, and this king's daughter marries this king. They don't know who they're talking about. But when history records what happened, the events fit very much in particular. And so that's why we have these. Any comments on the 4 critters, the 4 beasts that come out of this? This is God stirring up the winds and controlling mankind, and this is how he's going to do it. These are the nations that are going to bring Jesus to us. Yes, ma'am.
Oh, wow, it magically appeared in my hand.
He's getting good at this. Yeah.
Well, I think possibly one of the reasons why there isn't an identified beast for Rome is because Rome hasn't yet taken shape. It's not really a recognized power in the world, especially in that area in Babylon.
Right.
I mean, it's at this point, I think, barely a city.
Right.
And it's just starting, so it's not really on anybody's radar at all.
Right. Well, and this, it makes a little more sense when both at the beginning of this and the end of this, these visions are terrifying to Daniel because he has no idea who he's talking about. He's just getting this image of these terrible monsters and creatures that are coming into their lifetime in his way and his time. Yes, sir.
Aren't the 10 horns then the rise of the Roman emperors and the succession?
Okay, so
I've heard that before, and I think that can be mapped out, but
yeah. So what we have to do is we have to kind of wax Roman here a little bit and talk names because there were, let's see, how do I go about this? I wasn't prepared to talk about this. But basically, if you track 10 kings, the first 10 Caesars, there was the last 3 were the Flavians and I forget what the name of the first ones were. What was it? Say again? Well, it started with Augustus.
Yeah.
Augustus Caesar, Tiberius, Caligula, we're familiar with some of these names, Claudius. Nero came after Claudius. He was number 5. Oh, he was number 3, according to my list here. Then there was these 3 kings Remember that number 3, the one horn came up, took it. There's 3 kings that wanted to maintain control like the first 5, but never did. First one committed suicide, the second one was run off, and the third one was assassinated. Galba, Otho, and Vitellius. They just didn't make it. What followed those 3 were the family called the Flavian family, and that horn, which is basically the 11th horn, is someone called Domitian. Domitian. He's the Caesar. He was the first Caesar who brought religion to the throne. I mean, they had their beliefs anyway, but he was the first one that said, I am not only a Caesar, I am a god, and you will worship me that way. He's the one that kind of brought that in. Now, they did that to some extent prior to that, but he's the one historically who's known for putting up statues and places of worship, cult worships, where they would worship that cult in the presence or in the place of a Caesar. Yes, sir.
So prior to that, the Romans deified dead people.
Yes.
They made Augustus a god. They made Julius Caesar a god. Right. Claudius's last words were, "Alas, I am becoming a god," and then he dies. Vespasian. Yeah. Alas, I am becoming a god, and then he dies. Domitian is the first one that's identified as a god in his own lifetime.
Right. And deitized his family who were living. And Vespasian was what to Domitian? It was his dad. It was his dad. And the son was Titus. Domitian was a brother. So now it's kind of, I'm all in the family, and I am going to have people start worshiping me as a deity and not just Caesar. And in Asia, where they made their first spread, these cult shrines that people worshiped were found in 7 cities. You want to guess what 7 cities those were? You know this. The same 7 cities that get the letter from the churches in the book of Revelation. So that's just kind of an interesting fact. So Domitian is the real troublemaker here, and this is what most historians, if you read and study this on your own, you'll see. Domitian was number 11, and he basically uprooted the 3 that never got a grasp on the kingdoms that they were trying to rule. They just died too fast or got killed too fast. When you go to the book of Revelation, it refers to this same person as number 8. And the following theory is those 3 that uprooted that never became anything weren't counted. And when you eliminate those 3 that didn't have any control over the nation whatsoever, the kingdom, that makes Domitian number 8 in that count. And again, historically, this was bad. And I got a whole section here about what he did and what he made people do. But the interpretation is going to be that he basically picked a fight with God is what he did. And that he was overcoming God's people before Christ came back to settle things down, and we'll talk a little bit more about that next week. But that's kind of the theory behind the 10 horns, and if you read 10 commentaries, you might come up with 10 different stories. That's the one that seems most practical historically and makes sense to me. Makes sense in history and for what we're trying to do here. We're not going to get into the next couple chapters, although these are our next couple verses, but these are good ones. We got an image here of the kingdom of God that to me is a better image and vision of the godly throne than I read in the Bible, and the same thing about Jesus right after we get that image of God in these last couple of verses. So I leave those for you to read after the interpretation. Any other comments? We won't go any further here. We'll pick up where we left off because the bell has rung. Okay, thank you for your comments.
Oh, how good it is when the family of God dwells together in spirit, in faith and unity, where the bonds of peace, of acceptance and love are the fruit of His presence here among us. So with one voice we'll sing to the Lord, and with one voice we'll Son, with the Father and the Spirit. So with one voice we'll sing to the Lord, and with one voice we'll lift out His word, till the whole earth sees the Redeemer has come, for He dwells in the presence of His people. So with one voice we'll sing to the Lord, and with one voice we'll lift out His word, till the whole earth sees the Redeemer has come, for He dwells in the presence of His people. For He dwells in the presence of His people. The law of the Lord is perfect, converting the soul. The testimony of the Lord is sure, making wise the simple. More to be desired are they than gold, yea, than much fine gold. Sweeter also than honey, and the honeycomb. The statutes of the Lord are right, rejoicing the heart. The commandment of the Lord is pure, enlightening the eyes. More to be desired are they than gold, yea, than much fine gold. Sweeter also than honey, and the honeycomb. The fear of the Lord is clean, enduring forever. The judgments of the Lord are true and righteous altogether. More to be desired are they than gold, yea, than much fine gold. Sweeter also than honey, and the honeycomb. Let the words of my mouth and the meditation of my heart be accepted in thy sight, O Lord, my strength and my Redeemer. More to be desired are they than gold, yea, than much fine gold. Sweeter also than honey, and the honeycomb. And in keeping of them there is great reward, there is great reward. And in keeping of them there is great reward. Lord, I come, I confess, bowing here, I find my rest, and without you, I fall apart. You're the one that guides my heart. Lord, I need you, oh, I need you. Every hour I need you. My one defense, my righteousness. Oh God, how I need you. Where sin runs deep, your grace is more. Where grace is found is where you are. And where you are, Lord, I am free. Holiness is Christ in me. Where you are, Lord, I am free. righteousness. Oh God, how I need you. So teach my song to rise to you. When temptation comes my way, and when I cannot stand, I'll fall on you. Jesus, you're my hope and stay. And when I cannot stand, I'll fall on you. Jesus, you're my hope and stay. Lord, I need you. Oh, I need you. Every hour I need you. My one defense, my righteousness. Oh God, how I need you. My one defense, my righteousness. Oh God, how I need you. Long before all of creation, all that I see